The Tale of Tinúviel. Now in the days soon after the telling of this tale, behold, winter approached the land of J.R.R. For now Ariel, forgetful of his wandering mood, abode some time in old Coterium. Never in these months did he fare beyond the good tilth that lay about the grey walls of that town, but many a hole in the kindreds of the Inwer and the Teleri received him as his glad guest, and ever more skilled in the tongues of the elves did he become, and ever more deep in the knowledge of their customs, of their tales, and of their songs. Then was winter come sudden upon the lonely isle, and the lawns and the gardens drew upon the sparkling mantle of white snows. Their fountains were still, and there all their bare trees silent. For the far sun glinted pale amidst the mist, or the splintered upon facets of long-hanging ice. Still fared Ariel not away, but watched the cold moon from the frosty skies look down upon Mar Vanwad Tivelia, and when above the stars gleamed blue he would listen, yet no sound of the flutes of Timpennin he heard now, for the breath of summer that is sprite, or of ever autumn's secret presence filled the air. He took his grey magic boat, and the swallows draw him far away. Even so, Ariel knew laughter and merriment and music too, and song in the dwellings of Coterium. Even Ariel the wanderer, whose heart has known no rest. Came now a grey day and a wan afternoon, but within was firelight and good warmth and dancing and merry children's noise. For Ariel was making a great play with the maids and the boys of the hall of play regrained. There at length, tired their mirth, they cast themselves down upon the rugs before the hearth, and a child among them, a little maid, said, "Tell me, O Ariel, a tale." "What should I tell ye thee, Elvain?" said he, and she, clambering upon his knee, said, "A tale of men and children of the great lands, or of thy home. Didst thou have a garden there, such as we, where poppies grew, and pansies like those that grow in the corner by the arbor of the thrushes?" Then Ariel told her of his home, which was in an old town of men, girt with a wall now crumbled and broken. A river ran thereby, over a castle, with a great tower hung. "A very high tower indeed," said he, "and the moon climbed higher ever." He thrust his face above it. "What is this high and big roof therein?" said Vayan, but Ariel said that he could not guess, for it was many years agone he had seen that castle or its tower. "For, O Vayan," said he, "I lived here but for a while, and for what has not grown for a boy. My father came of a coastward folk, and the love of the sea that I had never seen was in my bones, and my father whetted my desire, for he told me tales his father had told him before. Now my mother died in a cruel, hungry siege of that old town, and my father was slain in bitter fight about the walls, and in the end I, Ariel, escaped to the shoreland of the western sea, and mostly have lived upon the bosom of the waves, or by its side, since those far days." Now the children about were filled with sadness at the sorrows that fell upon those dwellers in the great lands, and at the wars and the death, and they clung to Ariel, saying, "O Melion, never go to war, oh hast thee ever yet?" "Aye, often enough," said Ariel, "but not to the extent of the great worlds and the earthly kings and mighty nations, which are cruel and bitter, and many fair lands and lovely things, and even women and sweet maids such as thou, Vayan Melanir, when we're overwhelmed by them in ruin. And yet gallant affrays I've seen, wherein small bands of brave men, some two sometimes meet, and swift blows are dealt. But behold, why speak of these things, little one? Wouldst thou not hear of my first ventures upon the sea?" There was much eagerness and light, and Ariel told him of his wanderings about the western havens, of the comrades he made, and the ports he knew, and how he was wrecked upon far eastern islands, upon least, upon lonely one, and he came upon an ancient sailor who gave him shelter, and over a fire with his lonely cabin told him strange tales of things beyond the western seas, of the magic isles, and of that most lonely one that lay beyond. Long ago he had once sighted it shining far off, and after afar he sought it many a day in vain. Ever after, said Ariel, did I sail more curiously about the western isles, seeking more stories of the kind. Thus it is indeed that after many great voyages I came upon myself, by the blessing of the gods, to J.R.R. in the end. Wherefore I sit here talking to thee, the young, till my words have run dry. Nonetheless the boy, Acer, called him to beg him more of the ships and the sea, but Ariel said, Nay, there is still time. Infil ring the gong for evening meat. Come, one of you children, tell me a tale that you have heard. Then Vayan sat up and clapped her hands, saying, I will tell you the tale of Tinúviel. The tale of Tinúviel. I give thee now the text of the tale of Tinúviel. Who was then Tinúviel? Said Ariel. Know you not? Said Elser. Tinúviel was the daughter of Tinúviel. Tinúviel, said Vayan. But said the other, 'Tis all one but the elves of this house, who love the tale, say Tinúviel, though there hath said that Tinúviel alone, and his right name, ere wandered into the woods. Hush thee, Elser, said Vayan, for it is my tale, and I will tell it to Ariel. Did I not see Gwendolen and Tinúviel once with my own eyes when journeying by the way of dreams in long past days? When was Queen Gwendolen like? For so do the elves call her. Oh, Vayan, if thou sawest her, said Acer. Slender and very dark of hair, said Vayan, and her skin was white and pale, but her eyes shone and seemed deep. She was clad in filmy garments, most lovely yet of black, jet-spangled and girt with silver. If she ever sang, if she danced, dreams and slumbers passed over your head and made it heavy. Indeed, she was a sprite that escaped Lothlorien's gardens before even Kor was built, and she wandered in the wooded places of the world, and nightingales went with her and often sang about her. It was the song of these birds that smote the ears of Tinúviel, leader of the tribe of Eldor, which became before the Solasimpi, the pipers of the shore, and he fared with his companions behind the house of the Orrom from Palsinor, who Vatar had a seed of music in the hearts of all but kindred, or so they are said. She is one of them, and it blossomed after very wondrously. But now the song of Gwendolen's nightingales was the most beautiful music that Tinúviel had ever heard. He strayed forsoid for a moment, he thought, from the host, seeking the dark trees whence it might have come, and it is said that it was not a moment before he hearkened, but many years, and vainly his people sought him, until at length they followed Rome, and were borne again upon Tolkien far away, and he never saw them again. Yet after a while, as it seemed to him, he came upon Gwendolen, lying in a bed of leaves, gazing at the stars above her, and hearkening also to her birds. Now Tinúviel, stepping softly, stooped and looked upon her, thinking, Lo, here is a fair obeying, even as the most beautiful of my own folk. For indeed Gwendolen was not elf or woman, but of the children of the gods. And bending further to touch a tress from her hair, he snapped a twig with his foot. Then Gwendolen was up away and laughing softly, sometimes singing distantly, or dancing ever before him, till a swoon of fragrant slumbers upon him, and he fell face downward beneath the trees, and slept a very great while. Now when he awoke he thought no more of his people, and indeed it had been vain, for long now she had reached Valinor, but desired only to see the Twilight Lady, and she was not far, for she had remained nigh at hand, and watched over him. More of their story I know not, O Ariel, save that in the end she became his wife, for Tinúviel and Gwendolen very long were indeed king and queen of the lost elves of Artenor, of the land beyond, So it is said here, long, long after, as thou knowest, Melko brake again into the world from Valinor, and all the Eldor, both those who remained in the dark, or those who had been lost again from the march from Pallasor and Noldor, saw that fared back into the world after seeing him stolen treasuries held beneath his power as thralls. And yet it is told that there were many who escaped and wandered in the woods and empty places, and of these many a wild and woodland land, called beneath King Tinúviel. Of these are called Ilacondri, which is said to Eldor that had never beheld Valinor, where the two trees are dealt in core, and eerie they were and strange things, knowing little of light or loveliness of music, save it be dark songs and chantings, and a rugged wonder that faded in the woodland places, or echoed in deep caves. Different indeed did they become when the sun arose, and many indeed before that there were numbers mingled with the many wandering gnomes, and wayward sprites too they were of Lothlorien's host, and dwelt within the courts of Tinúviel, being followers of Gwendolen, and those were the kindred of the Eldael. In many days of sunlight and moonshine dwelt Tinúviel in Ardenor, and or he and the most of his folk went to the battle of unnumbered tears, though that story touches not this tale. Yet was his lordship greatly increased after that unhappy field with fugitives, who fled to his protection. Given was his dwelling from the vision and knowledge of Melko, from the magics of Gwendolen the Fae, and she wove spells about the paths thereto, that none but the Eldor might twirl them easily, and so was the king secured from all dangers, save it be treachery alone. Now his halls were builded in a deep cavern of great size, and they were none the less kingly and a fair abode. This cavern was at the heart of the mighty forest of Ardenor, which is the mighty of forestest, and a stream ran before its doors, but none could enter the portal save the stream, and a bridge spanned it narrow and well guarded. Those places were not ill built from the Armont mountains, were not utterly distant from where Hillstone dwelt men, and Thrall Nodolai neighboured, and few free Eldor went. No, I will tell you of the things that happened in the halls of Tinúviel after the rising of the sun, but indeed long ere the forgotten battle of unnumbered tears, and Melko did not complete his design, nor he had unveiled his full might, nor his cruelty. Two children had Tinúviel then, Narration and Tinúviel, and Tinúviel was a maiden, the most beautiful maiden of all the maidens of the hidden elves, and no few have been so fair, for her mother was a Fae, a daughter of the gods, but there on them was a boy strong and merry, and above all things he delighted to play upon the pipe of reeds or other woodland instruments. He is named now among the three most magic players of the elves, and others are Tinfang Warble and J.R.R, who plays beside the sea. But Tinúviel's joy was neither in the dance, no names are set with hers, for the beauty and the subtlety of her twinkling feet. Now it was the delight of Darien and Tinúviel to fare far away from the cavernous palace of Tinúviel, their father together to spend long times amid the trees. There would Darien sit upon a tussock or a rue root and make music, while Tinúviel danced there too. When she danced to the playing of Darien, more lissome was she than Gwendolen, more magical than Tinfang Warble, neath the moon. Nor may an newting blave in the rose gardens of Valinor, where Nissa dances in the lawns of the never-fading green. Even at night, where the moon shone pale, still they would play and dance, and they were not afraid as I should be, for the rule in Tinúviel and Gwendolen held evil from the woods, and Melko troubled them not, as yet as men were hemmed from beyond the hills. Now the place they loved most was a shady spot, and elms grew there, and beech too, but these were not very tall, and some chestnut trees were there with white flowers, but the ground was moist, and a great misty growth of hemlock rose from beneath the trees. At a time of June they were playing there, and the white umbels of the hemlocks were a cloud about the holes of the trees, and there Tinúviel danced until the evening faded late, and there were many white moths abroad. Tinúviel, being a fairy, minded them not, as many of the children of the men do. Though she knows not beetles and spiders will do none of the Eldar touched to the unwilling. But now the white moths fluttered about her head, and Darien trilled an eerie tune, when suddenly that strange thing befell. Never have I heard how Beren came thither over the hills, yet braver was he than most, and of those shout how here, those with the love of the wandering maybe alone that sped him through the terrors of the Iron Mountains, until he reached the lands beyond. Now Beren was a gnome, son of Egnor, the forester who hunted in the darker places, and the north of Hillsong. Dread and suspicion was between the Eldar, and those of their kindred had tasted the slavery of Melko, and in this the evil deeds of the gnomes and the Haven and the Swan revenged themselves. Now the lies of Melko ran among Beren's folk, so they believed the evil things of the secret elves, and yet now did see Tinúviel dancing in the twilight, and Tinúviel was in a silver pearly dress, and her bare white feet were twinkling among the hemlock stems. Then Beren cared not for whether the Vala or the elf or the child of men crept near to her, and he leant along a long elm, and it grew a mound so that he might look upon the little glade where she was dancing, for the enchantment made him faint. So slender was she, and so fair, that at length he stood heedlessly upon the open fetter to gaze upon her, and in that moment the full moon came brightly through the boughs, and Darien caught sight of Beren's face. Straightway did he perceive that none of them were of their folk, and all the elves of the woodland thought of the gnomes of Dor Lorim as treacherous creatures, cruel and faithless. Where Darien dropped his instrument and crying, "Flee, flee, O Tinúviel! An enemy walks this wood," he was gone swiftly through the trees. Then Tinúviel in her amaze followed, not straightway, but for she understood not his words at once, and knowing she could not run or leap so heartily as her brother, she slipped suddenly down among the white hemlocks, and hid herself beneath a very tall flower with many spreading leaves. Here she looked on with her white raiment, like a spatter of moonlight shimmering through the leaves upon the floor. Then Beren was sad, for he was lonely and grieved and fright, and he looked for Tinúviel everywhere about, looking but not fled. Thus suddenly did he lay his hand upon her shoulder arms. Through the leaves with a cry she started away from him, and flitted as fast as she could in the wan light, and beneath the tree trunks and the hemlock stalks. The tender touch of her arm made Beren yet more eager than before to find her, and he followed swiftly, and not swiftly enough, for in the end she escaped him, and reached the dwellings of her father in fear, nor did she dance alone in the woods for many a day after. This was a great sorrow for Beren, who would not leave these places, hoping to see that fair elfin maiden once again, and he danced in the woods, and wandered, growing wild and lonely for many a day, and searching for Tinúviel. By dawn or dusk he sought her, but ever more hopefully when the moon shone bright. At last one night he caught a sparkle far off, and lo, there she was dancing alone in a little treeless knoll, and Darien was not there. Often and often she came there and danced and sang to herself, and sometimes Darien would be nigh, and then Beren watched from the wood's edge afar, and sometimes he was away and Beren crept down closer. Indeed, for long Tinúviel knew of his coming, and feigned otherwise. For long her fear had departed for reason of the wistful hunger of his face, lit by the moonlight, and she saw that he was kind and in love with her beautiful dancing. Then Beren took to following Tinúviel secretly through the woods, even to the entrance of the cave and the bridge's head, and when she was gone he would pass across the stream, softly saying, "Tinúviel," for he had caught the name from Darien's lips, and though he knew it not, Tinúviel was often hearkened within the shadows of the cavernous doors, and laughed softly or smiled. At length one day she danced alone. He stepped out more boldly and said to her, "Tinúviel, teach me to dance." "Who art thou?" she said. "Beren, I am from across the bitter hills." "Then, if thou wouldst dance, follow me," said the maiden, and she danced Beren away into the woods, nimbly and yet not so fast that he could not follow. Ever and anon she would look back and laugh at him stumbling after, say, "Dance, Beren, dance!" As they danced beyond the bitter hills, in this way they came winding past to the abode of Tinúviel, and Tinúviel beckoned Beren beyond the stream. He followed beyond, wandering into the cave and the deep holes of her home. When, however, Beren found himself before the king, he was abashed, and the stateliness of the queen Gwendolen he was in great awe. And beholding of the king, he said, "Who art thou who stumblest into my holes unbidden?" And he had naught to say. Tinúviel answered therefore for him, saying, "This, my father, is Beren, a wanderer from beyond the hills, and he would learn to dance as the elves of Artenor can dance." And she laughed. But the king frowned when he heard from whence Beren came, and he said, "Put away thy light words, my child, and say that this wild elf of the shadows sought to do thee any harm." "Nay, father," said she, "and I think there is not evil in his heart at all. And be thou not harsh with him, unless thou desirest to see thy daughter Tinúviel weep, for more wonder he has at my dancing than any I have known." Therefore said Tinúviel now, "O Beren, son of the Nodoli, why dost thou desire the elves of the wood ere thou dost return us whence thou camest?" So great was the amazed joy in Beren's heart when Tinúviel spake thus for him to her father that his courage rose within him, and his adventurous spirit that had brought him out of Silsum and over the mountains of iron awoke again. And looking boldly upon Tinúviel, he said, "Why, O king, I desire thy daughter Tinúviel, for she is the fairest and most sweet of all maidens that I have seen and dreamed of." Then there was silence in the hall, save the Darien laughed, and all who heard were astounded. But Tinúviel cast down her eyes, and the king, glancing at the wild and rugged aspect of Beren, also burst into laughter, whereat Beren flushed for shame, and Tinúviel's heart was sore for him. "Why, wed my Tinúviel, fairest of the maidens of the world, and become a prince of the woodland elves? 'Tis a little boon for a stranger to ask," quoth Tinúviel. "Haply I may right ask in something once in return. Nothing great shall it be, a token only of thy esteem. Bring me a Silmaril from the crown of Melko, and that day Tinúviel weds thee, and she woo." And all in that place knew the king treated the matter as an uncouth jest, having pity on the gnome, and they smiled, for the fame of the Silmarils of Famer was great throughout the world, and the Nodoli had told tales of them. Many that had escaped from Angamundi had seen blazing lustrous and the iron crown of Bedbo. Never did the crown leave his head, for he treasured the jewels as is his eyes, and no crown in the world, no fay, nor elf, nor man, could ever hope to set finger on them, nor live. This did indeed Beren know, and he guessed with the meaning of their mocking smiles. Aflame and with anger he cried, "Nay, but is too great a small a gift for the father of so sweet a bride. Strange none the less to seem to me the customs of the woodland elves, like the rude laws of the folk of men, that thou should give the name of the gift unoffered. Yet lo, I, Beren, a huntsman of the Nodoli, will fulfill thy small desire." And with that he burst from the hall, wherein all stood astonished. But Tinúviel wept suddenly. "'Twas ill done, my father," she cried, "to send one to his death with thy sorry jesting. For now methinks he will attempt the deed, being maddened by thy scorn, and Melko will slay him, and none will ever look again with such love upon my dancing." Then said the king, "'Twill not be the first of gnomes that Melko has slain, and for less reason. It is well for him that he lies not bound in here, and grievous spells for his trespass in my halls, and for his insolent speech." Yet Gwendolen said naught, nor did she chide Tinúviel, or question her sudden weeping for this unknown wanderer. Beren, however, going from before the face of Tinúviel, was carried by his wrath far through the woods, until he drew nigh to the lower hills and treeless lands that warned of his approach from the bleak iron mountains. Only then did he feel his weariness and stay his march. Therefore for his greatest travails began. Nights of deep despondency were his, and he saw no hope whatever in his quest. And indeed there was little, and indeed, as soon as he followed the iron mountains till he drew nigh to the terrible regions of Melko's abode, the greatest fears assailed him. Many poisonous snakes were in those places, and wolves roamed about, and more fearsome still were the wandering bands of the goblins and the orcs, foul broodlings of Melko, who fared abroad, doing his evil work, snaring and capturing beasts and men and elves, and dragging them to their lord. Many times was Baron near to capture by the orcs, and once he escaped the jaws of a great wolf, only after a combat wherein he was armed, but with an ashen club. And other perils and adventures did he know each day of his wandering to Agamemnon. Hunger and thirst too tortured him often, and often he would have turned back, had it not been well nigh as perilous going on. But the voice of Tinúviel pleading with Tinúviel echoed in his heart, and at night it seemed to him that his heart had heard her sometimes weeping softly for him, somewhere far away in the woodlands of her home. And this was indeed true. One day he was driven by great hunger to search, amid a desert encamping of some orcs, for scraps of food, but some of these returned unawares, and took him prisoner. They tormented him, but did not slay him, for their captain, seeing his strength, warm as he was with hardship, thought that Melko might chance be pleasured, as if he was brought before him and set to some heavy thrall work in the mines or in his smithies. So it became that Baron was dragged before Melko, and bore a stout heart within him none the less, for it was a belief among his father's kindred that the power of Melko would not abide forever, but the Valar would hearken at last to the tears of the Nodoli, and would arise and find Melko, and open Valinor once more to the weary elves, and great joy should come back upon the earth. Melko, however, looking to him with wrath, asking him a gnome, Thorol by birth of his, had dared to fare away into the woods unbidden, but Bidden answered that he was no runagate, but came a kindred of gnomes that dwelt in Eriador, and mingled among the folk of men. Then was Melko yet more angry, for he sought ever to destroy the friendship and intercourse of elves and men, and said that evidently here was a plotter of deep treachery against Melko's lordship, and one worthy of the tortures of the Balrogs. But Baron, seeing his peril, answered, Think not, O most mighty Ainu Melko, lord of the world, that this can be true, for if it were, then I would not be here unaided and alone. No friendship, Baron, son of Egnor, for the kindred of men. Nay, indeed, wearying utterly of the lands infested by that folk, he is wandered out of Eriador. Many a great tale has my father made to me aforetime of thy splendour and glory, wherefore, albeit I have no renegade thrall, I do desire nothing so much as to serve thee, in what small manner I may. And Baron said therewith he was a great trapper of small animals, and a snarer of birds, and had become lost in the hills of these pursuits, and many of this much wandering came in strange lands, and even as the orcs seized him, then he would indeed have no other rede of safety than to approach the majesty of Ainu Melko, and beg him to grant him some humble office as a winner of meats for his table perchance. And now Valar must have inspired that speech, or perchance it was a spell of cunning words cast upon him in compassion by Gwendolen, for indeed it saved his life. And Melko, marking his hearty frame, believed him, and was willing to accept him as a thrall of his kitchens. Flattery savoured over sweet in the nostrils of that Ainu, for his unfathomed wisdom, many a lie in the whom he despised deceived him, and they were clothed sweetly in words of praise. Therefore he gave orders to Baron to be made a thrall to Vildo, prince of cats. Now Tevildo was a mighty cat, the mightiest of all, and possessing of an evil sprite. As some say, he was at Melko's constant following, and that cat had all cats subject to him, and he and his subjects were chasers and getters of meat from Melko's table for his frequent feasts. Wherefore is it that there is hatred between the elves and old cats? And even now, when Melko rules no more, his beasts are to become little account. When therefore a baron was led away from the halls of Tinúviel, and these were not utterly distant from the place of Melkor's throne, he was much afraid, for he had not looked upon such a turn in things, and those halls were ill lighted, and were full of growling and of monstrous purrings in the dark. All about shone cats' eyes glowing like green lamps, or red or yellow, where Tinúviel's thanes sat waving and lashing their beautiful tails. But Tinúviel himself sat at their head, and he was a mighty cat, coal black and evil to look upon. His eyes were long and very narrow and slanted, and gleamed both red and green, and his great grey whiskers were as stout and sharp as needles. His purr was like the roll of drums, and his growl like thunder. But when he yelled in wrath, it turned the blood cold, and indeed small beasts and birds were frozen to stone, or dropped lifeless often at the very sound. Now Tinúviel, seeing Baron, narrowed his eyes until they seemed to shut, and said, "I smell dog," and he took a dislike to Baron from that moment. Now Baron had been a lover of hounds in his wild home. "Why," said Tinúviel, "do ye stare bring such a creature before me, unless perchance it is to make meat of him?" But those who led Baron said, "Nay, it was the word of Melkor, that this unhappy elf were out his life as a catcher of beasts and birds in Tinúviel's employ." Then indeed Tinúviel did screech in scorn, and said, "Then in sooth my lord was asleep, or his thoughts were settled elsewhere. For what ye think ye a child of Eldor, and to the prince of cats and his thanes in the catching of birds or in beasts, as well ye brought some clumsy-footed man. For none there are either of elves and men that can vie with us in our pursuit." None the less he set Baron to a test, and he bade him go catch 3 mice, "for my hull is infested with them," said he. This was indeed not true, as might be imagined, yet a certain few were, a very wild, evil, and magic kind, who desired to dwell in the dark holes, but they were larger than rats, and very fierce, and Tinúviel harboured them for his own private sport, and suffered not their numbers to dwindle. 3 days did Baron hunt them, but having nothing wherewith to devise a trap, and indeed did not hie to Melkor, saying he had cunning in such contrivances, he hunted in vain, getting nothing better than a bitten finger for all his labour. Then is Tinúviel scornful, and in great anger, but Baron got no harm of him or his thanes, for at that time Melkor's bidding, other than a few scratches. Evil, however, was her days. Here in the dwellings of Tinúviel they made him a scullion, and his days passed miserably in the washing of floors and vessels, in the scrubbing of tables, in the hewing of wood, in the drawing of water. And too often he would be set to turning of spits, where birds and fat mice were daintily roasted for the cats. Yet seldom did he get food or sleep himself. He became haggard and unkempt, and wished often that never sprang out of Hillsong he had never catch thought of the vision of Tinúviel. Now that fair maiden wept for a very great while after Baron's departure, and danced no more about the woods, and Derian grew angry, could not understand her. But she had grown to love the face of Baron peeping through the branches and the crackle of his feet as they followed her through the wood, and his voice that called wistfully, "Tinúviel, Tinúviel," across the stream through his father's doors he longed to hear again. She would not now dance, when Baron was fled to the evil halls of Melkor, and maybe had already perished. So bitter did his thought become at last, that a most tender maiden went to her mother. For her father she dared not go, or even suffer him to see him weep. "O Gwendolen, my mother," said she, "tell me of thy magic, if thou canst. How doth Baron fare? Is all well with him?" "Nay," said Gwendolen, "he lives indeed, but in an evil capacity. Hope is dead in his heart, for behold, he is a slave in the power of Tinúviel, Prince of Cats." Then said Tinúviel, "I must go and succor him, for none else know I don't move." Now Gwendolen laughed not, for in many years she was wise, and forwise for a thing that was unthought and a mad dream that any elf, still as a maiden, the daughter of the king, should fare untended to the halls of Melkil, even in those earlier days before the Battle of Tears, where Melkil's power had not grown great, and he veiled his designs and spread out his net of lies. Wherefore did Gwendolen softly bid her not to speak of such folly. But Tinúviel then said, Thou must plead with my father for aid, for he send warriors to Agamandi, and demand the freedom of Beren from Amon Melkil. This indeed Gwendolen did do, for her love of her daughter, and so wroth was Tindolent that Tinúviel wished that she had never sent, that her desire had been made known, and when Tinúviel made her not speak, nor think of Beren more, and swore he would slay him, and that he should trode these halls again. Now Tinúviel pondered much as she might do. Going to Darien, he begged him to aid her, or indeed to fare away with her to Agamandi as he would. But Darien thought little of Beren, and he said, Wherefore should I go into the direst peril that is in the wood for the sake of a wandering gnome of the woods? Indeed I have no love for him, for he has destroyed our play together, our music and our dancing. But Darien moreover told the king of what Tinúviel had desired of him, and this she did not have ill intents, but fearing Tinúviel fare away to her death in the madness of her heart. Now, when Tinúviel heard this, he called Tinúviel and said, Wherefore, or maiden o' mine, dost thou not put this fellow away from thee, and seek to do my bidding? But Tinúviel would not answer, for the king bade her promise that neither would she think more on Beren, nor would she seek in her folly to follow after him to the evil lands, whether alone or tempting any of his folk with her. But Tinúviel said that the first she would not promise, but the second only in part, for she would not tempt any of the folk of the woodlands to go with her. Then was her father mightily angry, and beneath his anger not a little amazed and afraid, for he loved Tinúviel. But this was the plan he had devised, for he might not shut his daughter forever from the caverns, where only a dim and flickering light ever came. Now above the caverns, in the portals of his cavernous hole, was a steep slope falling into the river, and there grew mighty beeches, for one that was named Hirathorn, the queen of the trees, for she was very mighty, and so deeply cloven into her bole that it seemed that if there was 3 shafts sprang from the ground together, and they were that of like size, round and straight, for their grain rind was as smooth as silk, unbroken to a branch or a twig, for a very great height above men's heads. Now Tinúviel let build up high in that strange tree, as high as men could fashion their longest ladders to reach, a little house of wood, and it was set above the first branches and sweetly veiled in leaves. Now that house had 3 corners, and 3 windows on each wall, and on each corner was the shafts of Hirathorn. And therefore then did Tinúviel had Tinúviel down, she would consent to be wise, and she fared up the ladders of tall pine. These were taken from beneath, and no way she had to get down again. All she had required was brought to her, and folk would scale the ladders, give her food, or whatever else she wished for, and then descending again take down away the ladders. And the king promised death to any who was leaning against the tree, or should try by stealth to place there at night. A guard therefore was set nigh upon the tree's foot, and yet came to Darien often thither in sorrow for what he had brought to pass, for he was lonely without Tinúviel. But Tinúviel was at most pleasure in her house among the leaves, and would gaze out of her little window, while Darien made his sweetest melodies beneath. But one night a dream from the Valar came to Tinúviel, and she dreamt of Beren, and her heart said, Let me be gone to seek him, whom all others have forgot. And waking, the moon was shining through the trees, and she pondered very deeply how she might escape. Now Tinúviel, daughter of Gwendolen, was not ignorant of magics or spells, as we will be believed. After much thought she devised a plan. The next day she those who came her bring, if they would, some of the clearest water of the stream below, but this must be drawn at midnight in a silver bowl, and brought to my hand with no word spoken. and afterwards she desired wine to be brought. But this, she said, must be borne hither in a flagon of gold at noon, or he who brings it must sing as he comes. And they did as they were bid, but Tinúviel was not told. Then said Tinúviel, Go now to my mother, and say to her that her daughter desires a spinning wheel to pass her weary hours. But Darien secretly she begged fashion a tiny loom, and he did this even in the little house of Tinúviel in the tree. But wherewith will you spin, and wherewith weave? Said he. And Tinúviel answered, With spells and with magics. But Darien knew not her design, nor said more to the king or to Gwendolen. Now Tinúviel took the wine and water when she was alone, and singing a very magical song in the while, she mingled them together. And as she lay in the bowl of gold, she sang a song of growth. And as they lay in the bowl of silver, she sang another song. And the names of the tallest and the longest things upon the earth were set upon that song. The beards of the Indravangs, the tail of the Caccaras, the body of Glorund, the bowl of Hiralorn, the sword of Nan, and she named, did she not forget the chain, and Gainu that owl, and Tolkas made, or gold of neck of Gilliam the giant, and longest of all, she spake of the hair of Ulian, the lady of the sea, that is spread throughout all the waters, that she did leave her head with the mingled water and wine. And so she did, as she sang a third song, a song of uttermost sleep, and the hair of Tinúviel, which was dark and finer than the most delicate threads in the twilight, began suddenly to grow very fast indeed. And after 12 hours had passed, night filled the little room, and then Tinúviel was very pleased that she lay down to rest. As she woke, the moon was as full with a black mist, and she was hidden deep underneath it. And lo, her hair was trailing out from the windows, and blowing about the tree boles in the morning. Then with difficulty she found her little shears, and cut the threads of that growth nigh to her head, and after that her hair grew only as it wont before. Then the labour of Tinúviel begun, and though she laboured with the deftness of an elf, long she was spinning and longer weaving still. And did any come hail her from below as she bade them be gone, saying, I am abed, and I desire only to sleep. And Darien was much amazed, and often called up to her, but she did not answer. Now the cloudy-haired Tinúviel wove a robe of misty black, soaked with drowsiness more magical far than even the mother had worn and danced in long, long ago before the sun arose. And therewith she covered her garments of shimmering white, and magic slumbers filled the air about her. But what remained, she remained into a twisted mighty strand. This she fastened to the bole of the tree within her house. Then was her labour ended, and she looked out of her window westward to the river. Already to the sunlight was fading in the trees. As dusk filled the woods, she began a song very soft and low, and as she sung she cast her long hair from the window, so that a slumberous mist touched the heads and the faces of the guards below, and they, listening to her voice, fell suddenly into a fathomless sleep. Then did Tinúviel, clad in her garments of darkness, slip down that robe of hair, light as a squirrel, and away she danced to the bridge, and before the bridge word she could cry out among them, she was dancing, and as the hem of her black robe touched they fell asleep, and Tinúviel fled very far away, as fast as her dancing feet would flit. Now the escape of Tinúviel reached the ears of Tinúviel. Great was his mingled grief and wrath, and all his courts were in uproars, and the woods ringing from the search. But Tinúviel was already far away, draining nigh to the gloomy foothills where the mountains of nights begin. And 'tis said that Darien, following after her, became utterly lost, and never came back to Elfaness, but turned towards Pallisor, and there played subtle magic musics, still wistful and lonely in the woods and forests of the south. Yet ere as long as Tinúviel went, for a sudden dread overtook. The thought of what she did, and what to do, lay before, and then did she turn back a while. She wept, wishing Darien was with her, and it was said that indeed he was not far off, but was wandering lost in the great pines, the forest of night, where afterward Terran slew Beleg by mishap. Nigh was Tinúviel now to these places, but she entered not that dark region. Regaining heart, she pressed on, and by reason of the greater magic of her being, and because the spell of wonder in her sleep that fared about her, no such dangers assailed her as and before. Yet it was a long and evil and weary journey for a maiden to tread. Now it is to behold to told thee, Ariel, that in these days Tevildo had not but one trouble in the world, and that was the kindred of the dogs. Many indeed these were, neither friends nor foes of the cats, because they had become subject to Melko, and were as cruel and as savage as any of his animals. Indeed, from the most cruel and the most savage he bred the race of wolves, for they were very dear indeed to him. Was it not the great wolf of Cacarus, Knife-Fang, father of wolves, who guarded the gates of Agamemnon in those days, and long had done so? Many there were who would now ever there bow to Melko, nor live wholly in fear of him, but dwelt either in the mellings of men, and guarded them both from much evil, had otherwise befallen them, or roamed the woods of Hillsong, passing the mountainous places, fared even at times into the regions of Artenor, and the lands beyond into the south. Did ever any of these view Tevildo, or any of his thanes as subjects? Then there was a great baying and a mighty chase, and albeit seldom was any cat slain by reason of their skill in climbing and of hiding, and because of the protecting might of Melko, though in great enmity between them, some of these hounds were held in dread among the cats. None, however, did Tevildo fear, for he was as strong as any among them, and more agile and more swift than only Huon, captain of dogs. So swift was Huon that on a time he had tasted the fur of Tevildo, and though Tevildo had paid him for that with a gash from his great cause, yet was the pride of the Prince of Cats unappeased. He lusted to do great harm to Huon of the dogs. Great, therefore, was the good fortune that befell Tinúviel, meeting with Huon in the woods, though at first she was mortally afraid and fled. But Huon undertook her in 2 leaps, and speaking soft and deep the language of the lost elves, he bid her not be afraid. Wherefore, said he, I do see an elfin maiden, and one most fair, wandering alone nigh to the abodes of Ainu and evil. Knowest thou not these are very evil places to be in, little one, even with a companion, and they were death to the lonely? That know I, said she, but I am not here of the love of the wayfaring, I seek only Baron. What knowest thou then, said Huon, of Baron? Or indeed meanest thou Baron of the son of the helmsman of the elves, Agnor of Bolrimion, a friend of mine since very ancient days? Nay, I know not even where my Baron be, thy friend. I seek only Baron from beyond the bitter hills, from I knew in woods beyond my father's home. Now he is gone, and my mother Gwendolen says of her wisdom that he is a thrall in the cruel house of Tevildo, Prince of Cats. And whether this be true or worse, now befallen him, I do not know. I go to discover him, though plan I have none. Then I will make thee one, who said Huon. But do trust in me, for I am Huon of the dogs, chief foe of Tevildo. Rest thee now with me a little while within the shadows of the wood, and I will think deeply. Then Tinúviel did as she said, and indeed she slept long within Huon watched, for she was very weary. And but within a while awakening, he said, Lo, I have tarried over long. Come, what is thy thought, O Huon? And Huon said, A dark and difficult matter this is, and no other rede I can devise but this. Creep now, if thou have the heart, to the abiding place of the prince, for the sun is high, and Tevildo and the most of his honoured household drowse upon the house and his terraces before the gates. There discover what manner thou mayest, whether Baron may be indeed within, as thy mother said to thee. Now I will lie not far and hence in the woods, and thou wouldst do me a pleasure, and aid thy own desires, and before Tevildo be Baron there, or be he not, thou tellest him well thou hast be stubbed upon by Huon of the dogs, lying sick in the woods in this place. Do not indeed direct him hither, for thou must guide him, and if may be, thyself. Thou wilt thou, I see, contrive for thee and Tevildo. Methinks bearing such tidings, Tevildo will not entreat thee ill, within his halls, nor seek to hold thee there. In this way Huan designed to do both Tevildo a hurt, perchance it might be to slay him, and to aid Beren, who he guessed in truth to be Beren son of Egnor, whom the hounds of Hilsum loved. Indeed, hearing the name of Gwendolen, and knowing thereby that this maiden was a princess of the woodland, he was eager to please her, because his heart warmed to her sweetness. Now Tinúviel, taking heart, stole to the hills of Tevildo, and Huan wondered what at his courage, following unknown after her, as far as he might for the success of his design. At length, however, she passed beyond his sight, and leaving shelter of the trees, came upon a region of long grass dotted with bushes that sloped ever upward, towards the shoulder of the hills. Now upon that rocky spur the sun shone, but of the hills and mountains of its back a black cloud brooded, for there was Agamandi, and Tinúviel fared not on, daring to look up at the gloom, for fear oppressed her, and as she went the ground rose, and the grass grew more scant and rocks grown, until it came even to a cliff, sheer of one side, and thereupon was a stony shelf, was the castle of Tevildo, no pathway thereto, and the place where it stood fell towards the wood, terrace after terrace, so that one might reach his gates save by many great leaps, and those became ever steeper, as the castle grew more nigh. Few were the windows of the house, and upon the ground there were none. Indeed, the very gate was in the air where the dwellings of the men were wont to be the windows of the upper floor, but the roof had many wide and flat places, open to the sun. Now does Tinúviel wander disconsolate through the lower terrace, and look on dread at the house dark upon the hill, where behind she became at a bend of rock upon a lone cat lying in the sun, and seemingly asleep. As she approached, she opened a yellow eye and blinked to her, and thereupon rising and stretching, he stepped up to her and said, "Whither away, little maid? Dost thou not know that you trespass upon the sunning ground of his highness Tevildo and his thanes?" Now Tinúviel was very much afraid, but she made as bold a claim as she was able, saying, "That I know, my lord." This pleased the old cat greatly, for he was in truth only Tevildo's doorkeeper. "But now I would indeed of your goodness be brought to Tevildo's presence now, nay, even if he sleeps," said she, for the doorkeeper lashed his tail in astonished refusal. "I have words for immediate import for his private ear. Lead me to him, my lord," she pleaded, and thereat the cat purred so loudly she dared to stroke his ugly head, and this was much larger than her own, being greater than that of any dog that is now on earth. Thus entreated, Emulian, which was such his name, said, "Come with me," and seizing Tinúviel suddenly by her garments, at the shoulder in great terror he tossed upon a back, and leaped from the second terrace. There he stood as Tinúviel scrambled from his back. He said, "Well is it thee, for that this afternoon Tevildo lieth upon this lowly terrace far from his house, for a great weariness and desire for sleep has come upon me. So fear me I should not be willing to carry thee much farther." Now Tinúviel was robed in a robe of sable mist. Saying that, Illyrian yawned mightily and stretched himself, before led it on the terrace to open space, where a wide couch of baking stones lay the horrible form of Tevildo himself, and both his evil eyes were shut. Going up to him, the door-cat Emulian spoke in his ear softly, saying, "A maiden awaits thy pleasure, my lord, who hath news of importance to deliver thee, nor should she take my refusal." Then did Tevildo angrily lash his tail, half opening an eye. "What is it, be swift," said he, "for this is no hour to come desiring audience of Tevildo, Prince of Cats." "Nay, lord," said Tinúviel, trembling, "be not angry, nor do I think thou wilt when thou hearest. Yet the matter is that we're better not whispered here where the breezes blow." And Tinúviel cast a glance, as it were in apprehension, towards the woods. "Nay, get thee gone," said Tevildo, "thou smellest of dog, and what news of good ever came to a cat from a fairy that had dealings with the dogs?" Why, sir, I smell of dogs is no matter of wonder, for I have just escaped from one, and it is indeed very certain mighty dog, who thou knowest, and I would speak. Then sat up Tevildo and opened his eyes, and he looked all about him, stretched 3 times, and at last bade the door-cat lead Tinúviel within, and Emelian caught her on her back as before. Then Tinúviel was in the sorest dread, for having gained what she desired, a chance of entering Tevildo's stronghold, and maybe discovering where Beren were there. She had no plan more, and knew what not would become of her. Indeed, she not had been able, not had she fled. Yet now those cats began to ascend the terraces towards the castle, and one leaped as Emelian make, bearing Tinúviel upwards, and then another, and in a third he stumbled so that Tinúviel cried out in fear, and Tevildo said, "What ails thee, Emelian, you clumsy foot? It is time you left my employ if age creeps on thee so swiftly." But Emelian said, "Nay, lord, I know not what it is, but a mist before mine eyes, and my head is heavy." He staggered as one drunk, so Tinúviel slid from his back. Thereupon he laid him down as if in a dead sleep, but Tevildo were wroth, and seized Tinúviel, and none too gently, and himself bore her to the gates. Then with a mighty leap he sprang within, and bidding that maiden alight, he set up a yell that echoed fearsomely in the dark ways and passages. Forthwith they hastened to him, and within some he bid descend to Emelian, and bid him and cast him from the rocks on the northern side, where they fall most sheer. "For it's no more use to me," he said, "for age has robbed him of his sureness of foot." And Tinúviel quaked to hear the ruthlessness of his beast, and even as he spake himself, he yawned and stumbled with a sudden drowsiness. Then he bade others to lead Tinúviel away to a certain chamber within. That is where Tevildo was accustomed to sit, and meet with his greatest thanes. It was bones and smelt evilly. No windows were there, but one door, and a hatchway gave it from the great kitchens. A red light crept thence, and dimly lit the place. Now so adread was Tinúviel, that when these catfolk left her there, she stood a moment unable to stir, but becoming useful to the darkness she looked upon, and spying the hatchway, she saw wide skill. She sprang there too, for it was not over high. She saw a nimble elf now gazing there through. It was ajar. She saw the wide vaulted kitchens, and the great fires that burnt there, and those toiled away within, and most were cats. But behold, there was a great fire stooped. Beren, he was grimed with labour, and Tinúviel sat and wept, but as yet dared nothing. Indeed, even as she sat, the harsh voice of Tevildo sounded suddenly within the chamber. Nay, where then in Melko's name had that mad elf fled? And Tinúviel, hearing, shrank against the wall, and Tevildo caught sight of her where she was perched, and cried, "Then the little bird sings not more. Come down, or I must fetch thee, for behold, I will not encourage the elves to seek audience of me in mockery." Then, partly in fear, and part in hope that her clear voice might carry even to Beren, Tinúviel began suddenly to speak very loud, and to tell her tale, so the chambers rang. "But hush, dear maiden," said Tevildo, "if the matter were secret without, it is not one for bowling within." Then said Tinúviel, "Speak not thus to me, old cat, mighty lord of cats though thou be, for I am not Tinúviel, princess of fairies, that has stepped out of my way to do thee a pleasure." Now at these words she had shouted them even louder than before. A great crash was heard in the kitchens, as a number of vessels of metal and earthenware let suddenly fall. But Tevildo snarled, "There trippeth that fool Beren the elf. Melko rid me of such folk." Yet Tevildo, gaining that Beren had been heard, and been smitten with astonishment, put aside her fears, and repented her daring no longer. Tevildo none the less was very wroth at her haughty words, and he had not been minded first to discover what good he might get from her tale, if it fared ill with Tinúviel straightway. Indeed, from that moment she was in great peril, for Melko and all his vassals held Tinúviel, and his folk as outlaws, and great was their joy to ensnare them and cruelly entreat them, and so much favour would Tevildo have gained, had he taken Tinúviel before his lord. Indeed so that she named herself. This he did purpose to do with his own business had done, but in a truth his wits were drowsed that day, and he forgot to marvel why Tinúviel sat perched on the sill of the hatchway, nor did he think more of Beren, for his mind was bent only to the tale Tinúviel bore to him. Wherefore, said he, disassembling his evil mood, nay, lady, be not angry, but come, delay whetteth my desire. What as thou hast for my ears, they twit already. But Tinúviel said, there is a great beast, rude and violent, and his name is Huan. And at that name Tevildo's back curved, and his back bristled and crackled, and the light of his eyes was red. And she went on, it seems to me a shame that such a brute be suffered to infest the woods so nigh to even the abode of the powerful prince of cats, my lord Tevildo. But Tevildo said, nor is he suffered, and cometh never there, save it by myself. How wow that may be, said Tinúviel, there he is now, and methinks at last his life might be brought utterly to an end. For lo, as I was going through the woods, I saw a great animal lay upon the ground moaning as if in sickness, and behold, it was Huan, and some evil spell or malady has him in his grip, and still he lies helpless in a dale, not a mile westward from the woods of this hole. Now with this perhaps I would not have trembled your ears, had not the brute approached me to succour him, snarled upon me, and essayed to bite me, and meseems that such a creature deserves whatever comes to him. Now all this Tinúviel spake. It was a great lie in which devising Huan had guided her, and maidens of the Eldar are not one to fashion lies. Yet have I never heard of any of the Eldar blamed therein for Beren afterward, nor neither do I. Now Tevildo was an evil cat, and Melko the wickedest of all the beings. Tinúviel was in dire peril at their hands. Tevildo, however, himself, a great and skilled liar, was so deeply versed in the lies and subtleties of all the beasts and creatures that he seldom knew whether to believe what was said to him or not, and was wont to disbelieve all things save those he wished to believe true, and though he was often deceived by the more honest. Now the story of Huan and his helplessness so pleased him that he was fain to believe it true, and determined at least to test it. Yet at first he feigned indifference, saying this was a small matter for such secrecy, and might have been spoken outside with further ado. But Tinúviel said she had not thought Prince Tevildo of cats needed to learn of the ears of Huan, heard the slightest sound till a league away, and the voice of a cat further than any sound else. Now therefore Tevildo sought to discover Tinúviel, under the pretence of mistrusting her tale, where exactly Huan might be found, but she made only vague answers, seeing in this her only hope of escaping the castle, and at length Tevildo, overcome by curiosity and threatening evil things if she should prove false, summoned two of his thanes to him. One was J.R.R, a fierce and warlike cat. Then did the three set out with Tinúviel from that place, but Tinúviel took off her magic garment of black and folded it, so for all its size and density appeared no more than the smallest kerchief. So forth was she able, and thus was borne down the terraces on the back of J.R.R without mishap, and no drowsiness assailed her bearer. Now they crept through the woods in the direction they had named, and soon does Tevildo smell dog and bristles and lashes his great tail. But after he climbs a lofty tree, and looks down from thence into that dale where Tinúviel had shown to them, there indeed he does see the great form of Huan, lying prostrate and groaning and moaning, and he comes down in much glee and haste, and indeed in his eagerness he forgets Tinúviel, who now in great fear for Huan lies hidden in the bank of fern. The design of Tevildo and his two companions was to enter that dale silently from different quarters, and so come all suddenly upon Huan unawares, and slay him, if he was too stricken to make fight, or to make sport of him in torment. This they did now, but even as they left out upon him, Hewin sprang to the air with a mighty baying. His jaws closed to the back, close to the night cat Okeroy, and Okeroy died, while the other thing fled howling up a great tree, and so was Tevildo left to face alone and with Hewin. And such an encounter was not much to his mind, and yet Hewin was upon him, too swiftly for flight, and they fought fiercely in that glade, and the noise Tevildo made was very hideous. But at length Hewin had him by the throat, and that cat might well perished had his claws not struck out blindly and pierced Hewin's eye. Then Hewin did give tongue, and Tevildo, screeching fearsomely, got himself loose with a great wrench and leapt of a tail, a tall and spruce tree that stood by, even as his companion had done. Despite his grievous hurt, Hewin now leaps beneath that tree, baying mightily, and Tevildo curses him, and casts evil words upon him from above. Then said Hewin, Lo, Tevildo, these are the words of Hewin, whom thou thought to catch and slay helpless, as the miserable mice it is thy wont to hunt. Stay up forever up the lonely tree, bleed to death of thy wounds, come down and feel again my teeth. But if neither are to their liking, tell me where is Tinúviel, princess of fairies, and Baron, son of Egnor, for these are my friends. Now these shall be set as ransom against thee, though you be valuing thee far more over thy worth. And as thou cursed elf, she lies whimpering in the ferns yonder, as my ears mistake not, said Tevildo, and Baron, methinks, as being soundly scratched by Mal, my cook, in the kitchens of my castle for his clumsiness there an hour ago. Then let them be given to me in safety, said Hewin, and thou mayst return safely to thy hold, and lick thyself unharmed. Of a surety, my thane who is here shall fetch them for me. And said Tevildo, but growled Hewin, I and fetched all thy tribe, and the host of orcs and the plagues of Melko. Nay, I'm no fool. Rather shall give I Tinúviel a token, and she shall fetch Baron, or I will stay here if thou like, and the other way. Then Tevildo was forced to cast down his golden collar, a token no cat dare dishonor. But Hewin said, No, nay, more is needed, for this will arouse all those folk to see thee. And this Tevildo knew and hoped. There it was, in the end, weariness and hunger prevailed upon the proud cat, a prince of the service of Melko, to reveal the secrets of cats, and the spell Melko entrusted to him. Those were the words of magic, whereby the stones of his evil house were held together, and whereby he held whole beasts of the catfolk under his sway, filling them with an evil power beyond their nature. For long as it is said that Tevildo was an evil fey in beast-like shape, wherefore he had been told that if Hewin laughed till the woods rang, if he knew the days of power of the cats were over. Now sped Tinúviel with the golden collar of Tevildo back to the lowest terrace before the cats. Standing before, she spake the spell in her clear voice. Then behold, the air was filled with the voices of cats, and the house of Tevildo shook, for therefore came from the house of indwellers, and they were shrunk to puny size, and were before afeard of Tinúviel. Waving the collar of Tevildo, spake before them of the words Tevildo had said in her hearing up to Hewin, and they cowered before her. But she said, Lo, and let the those of folk of elves and the children of men who were bound in these halls be brought forth. And behold, Baron was brought forth, but of other thralls there were none, save only Gimli, an aged gnome, bent in thraldom and grown blind, but whose hearing was the keenest that been in the world. And as old songs say, Gimli came leaning upon a stick, and Baron waded with him. But Baron was clad in rags and haggard, and he had in his hand a great knife he had caught up in the kitchen, fearing some new ill, when the house shook, and all the voices of the cats were heard. But when he beheld Tinúviel standing among the house of cats, he shrank from her, and saw the great collar of Tevildo. Then was he amazed utterly, and he knew not what to think. But Tinúviel was very glad, and spoke, saying, O Baron from beyond the bitter hills, wilt thou now dance with me? Let it not be here. And she led Beren far away, and all those cats sat howling and wailing. So Huan and Tevildo heard it from the woods, but none followed or molested them, for they were afraid, and the magic of Melko had fallen from them. This indeed they rued from afterwards when Tevildo returned home, and followed by his trembling comrade, for Tevildo's wrath was terrible, and he lashed his tail, and dealt blows at all who stood nigh. How Huan and the dogs, though it may seem a folly, when Beren and Tinúviel came from that glade, had suffered the evil prince to return without further war. But the great collar of gold he had set about his own neck, and this was Tevildo even more angry than all else, for a great magic of strength of power lay within. Little to Huan's liking was it that Tevildo lived still, but now no longer did he fear the cats, and that tribe has fled before the dogs ever since. The dogs hold them in scorn since the humbling of Tevildo in the woods nigh Agamandi, and Huan had not done any greater deed. Indeed, afterward Melko heard all that he cursed Tevildo for his folk and banished them, nor have they since but that day their lord or master or any friend, and their voices wail and screech, for their hearts are very lonely and bitter, full of loss, and there is only darkness therein, and no kindliness. At the time, however, whereof they tells Tevildo's chief desired chapter to recapture Beren and Tinúviel, and to slay Huan, then he might regain the spell and magic he had lost, for he was in great fear of Melko, and he dared not seek his master's aid, and reveal his defeat and the betrayal of the spell. Unwitting of this, Huan feared these places, and was in great dread lest these doings came swiftly to Melko's ear, as they did most things came past in the world. Wherefore now Tinúviel and Beren wandered far away with Huan, and they became great in friendship with him. In that life with Beren became strong again, and his thraldom fell from him, and Tinúviel loved him. Yet wild and rugged and very lonely were those days, for never a face of ill for a man did they see, and Tinúviel grew at last longed sorely for Gwendolen her mother, and the songs of the sweet magic she used to sing to her children, as twilight fell in the woodlands by their ancient halls. Often she half fancied when she heard the flute of Darien, her brother, in pleasant glades wherein they sojourned, and her heart grew heavy. At length she said to Beren and to Huan, I must return home. Now it is Beren's heart that is overcast by sorrow, for he loved that life in the woods with the dogs, and now many others joined Huan. If not Tinúviel were there. None the less, said he, never may I go back with thee to the land of Artenor, nor come there ever to seek after thee, sweet Tinúviel, save only bearing a Silmaril. Nor may that all never be achieved, for I am a fugitive from the very halls of Melko, in danger of the most evil plains, any of his servants spy me. Now, instead of the grief for the hearting of his part of Tinúviel, she was torn in mind, abiding not the thought of leaving Beren, not yet living others thus in exile. So she sat a great while sad in thought, and she spoke not. But Beren sat nigh, and at a great length said, Tinúviel, only one thing we can do. Go get a Silmaril. She sought thereupon Huan, seeking his aid and advice, but he was very grave, and saw nothing but folly in the matter. Yet in the end Tinúviel begged of him of the fell of Oikoroi, that he slew in the fray in the glade. Now Oikoroi was a very mighty cat, and Huan carried that fell with him as a trophy. Now doth Tinúviel put her skill in fairy magic. She sews Beren into this fell, and makes him into the likeness of a great cat, and she teaches him how to sit and sprawl, how to step and bound and trot in the semblance of a cat, till Huan's very whiskers bristled at the sight, and therein Beren and Tinúviel laughed. Never, however, could Beren learn to screech or wail or purr like a cat that walked, nor could Tinúviel awaken a glow in the dead eyes of the catskin. Though we must put up with that, she said, and thou hast the air of a noble cat, if thou hold thy tongue. Then they did bid farewell to Huon, and set out the hills of Melka by easy journeys. Our Baron was in great discomfort, and heat of the burr of the Okoroy, and Tinúviel's heart became lighter a while than it had been for long. She strong Baron pulled his tail, but Baron was angry, for he could not lash out in anger as fiercely as he wished. At length they drew near to Agamandi, and as indeed the rumblings and deep noises, and the sound of mighty hammerings of 10,000 smiths labouring unceasingly declared to them, nigh were the sad chambers where the thrall and old Oloi laboured bitterly under the dorks and goblins of the hills, and here the gloom and the darkness was so great that their hearts fell. But Tinúviel arrayed her once more in her garment of dark sleep. Now the gates of Agamandi were iron and wrought hideously and set with knives and spikes, and before them lay the greatest wolf the world has ever seen, as Carcarus Knifefang, who had never slept, and Carcarus growled when he saw Tinúviel approach, but of the cat he took not much heed, and he thought little of cats that they were passing in and out. Growl not, O Carcarus, said she, for I go to seek my lord Moko. This Thane of Tevildo goeth with me as escort. Now the dark robe veiled all of her shimmering beauty, and Carcarus was not troubled in his mind. Yet nonetheless he approached, his wont to snuff the air of her, and the sweet fragrance of the Eldar that garment might not hide. Therefore straightway did Tinúviel begin a magic dance, and the black strands of her dark veil she cast in his eyes, so his eyes shook with a drowsiness, and he rolled over and was asleep. But not until he was fast in dreams of great chases of the woods of Hillsong was he yet a whelp did Tinúviel cease, and then the twain did enter between the portal, winding down many shadowy ways. They stumbled into the length, unto the very presence of Melko. In that gloom, Baron passed well enough as a very Thane of Tevildo, and indeed Orkoroy had seen aforetime much about the halls of Melko, so none had seen him and heeded him, and he slunk low in the very chair of the Ainu unseen. But the adders and evil things there lying set him in great fear, so he durst not move. Now this fell out most unfortunately, for Tevildo had been Melko their deceit would have been discovered, and indeed that danger they had thought, not knowing Tevildo sat now in his souls, and not knowing what to do should his discomfiture become noised in Agamandi. But behold, Melko espies Tinúviel, and saith, Who thou art that flittest about my halls like a bat? How monest they came in? For surety thou must not belong here. Nay, I do not yet, saith Tinúviel. No, I've chance hereafter of thy goodness, my lord Melko. Knowest thou, I am Tinúviel, daughter of Tinúviel the outlaw, and he hath driven me from his halls, for he is an overbearing elf, and I give not love at my command. Now in truth Melko, amazed that the daughter of Tinúviel came thus of her free will to his dwelling, Agamandi the terrible, and suspecting something untoward, he asked what was her desire. For knowest not, he saith he, for is no love here for his father or his folk, nor needest there for hope soft words and good cheer from me. So that how my father said, saith he. But wherefore I need to believe him? Behold, I have a skill of subtle dances. I would dance before you now, my lord, and then methinks I might readily be granted some humble corner of your halls, wherein to dwell until such times as you call for the little dancer Tinúviel to lighten your cares. Nay, saith Melko, such things are little to my mind, but thou hast come to me to dance. The dance after we will see. And for that he leered horrible, with his dark mind pondering some evil. Then Tinúviel did begin a dance, as neither she had neither sprite, nor fay, nor elf had danced before or had done since, and after a while even Melko's gaze was held in wonder. Round the hall she fared, swift as a swallow, noiseless as a bat, magically beautiful as only Tinúviel ever was. And now only she was at Melko's side, before him, now behind. Her mystery draperies touched his face and waved before her eyes. The folk that sat before the walls in that place whelmed, in sleep, one by one, falling into deep dreams of all their ill hearts desired. Beneath his chair the adders lay like stones, and the wolves before his feet yawned and slumbered. And Melko gazed on, enchanted, but he did not sleep. Then began Tinúviel to dance, a yet swifter dance before his eyes, and even as she danced she sang in a very voice, very low and wonderful, a song which Gwendolen had taught her long ago, a song that the youths and maidens sing beneath the cypresses in the gardens of Lorien, where the tree of gold had waned and Silpion was gleaming. The voices of nightingales were in it, and many subtle odors seemed to fill the air of that noisome place. She trod the floor lightly as a feather in the wind, nor has any voice or sight of seen such beauty again had been seen there. And I know Melko, for all his power and majesty, succumbed to the magic of that elf maid, and indeed the eyelids of Lorien had grown heavy had he been there to see. Then did Melko fall forward drowsed, sank into the last in utter sleep, and down from his chair upon the floor his iron crown rolled away. Suddenly Tinúviel ceased. In the hall no sound was heard, save for slumberous breath. Even Beren slept beneath the very seat of Melko, but Tinúviel shook him, so he awoke at last. Then in fear and trembling he tore asunder his disguise, and freeing it from himself, he leapt to his feet. Now does he draw that knife he had from Tevildo's kitchens. He seizes the mighty iron crown, but Tinúviel could not move it, and scarcely might the shoes of Beren avail to turn it. Great is the frenzy of their fear, and that dark hole of sleeping evil Beren labours, as noiselessly as it may be, to prize out a Silmaril with his knife. Now does he loose him, the great central jewel, and sweat pours from his brow. But even as he forces it from the crown, lo! his knife snaps with a loud crack. Tinúviel smothers a cry thereat, and Beren springs away with the one Silmaril in his hand, and the sleepers stir, and Melko groans, as though ill thoughts disturbed his dreams. A black look comes upon his sleeping face. Content now with one flashing gem, those twain fled desperately from the hall, stumbling wildly down many dark passages, till from the glimmering of the grey they knew they cleared the gates, and behold, Carcarus lies across the threshold, awake once more and watchful. Straightway Beren thrust himself before Tinúviel, although she had said him nay. This proved in the end ill, for Tinúviel had not time to cast her spell of slumber over the beast again. Ere seeing Beren, he bared his teeth and growled angrily. Wherefore this surliness, Carcarus, said Tinúviel. Wherefore this gnome who it entered not, and yet now issueth in haste, quoted Knifefang. And with that he leapt upon Beren, who struck straight between the wolf's eyes with his fist, catching for his throat in the other hand. Then Carcarus seized that hand in his dreadful jaws, for it was the hand when Beren clasped the blazing Silmaril, and both the hand and the jewel Carcarus brought off into his red maw. Now was the agony of Beren, and the fear and anguish in Tinúviel, and even as they expect to feel the teeth of a wolf anew, a strange thing and terrible comes to pass. Behold now, that Silmaril blazeth with a white and hidden fire of its own nature, and is possessed of a fierce and holy magic, for it did not come from Valinor and the blessed realms, being fashioned with spells of the gods, and gnomes it came before. They doth not tolerate the touch of evil, or the flesh of unholy hand. Now cometh it the foul body of Carcarus, and suddenly that beast is burnt with a terrible anguish, and the howling of his pain is ghastly to hear, as it echoeth in those rocky ways, so that all the sleeping court awakes. Then Tinúviel and Beren flee like the wind from the gates. Then Carcarus was far before them, raging in madness, and as a beast pursued by Balrogs. And after they draw breath upon Tinúviel, and whipped over the maimed arm of Beren, kissing it often, so often that it behold bled not, and pain left it, and it was healed by the tender healing of her love. and yet was Baron ever after surnamed among all folks, and Bearman the one-handed, and in which the language of the Lonely Isle was Elm of Voice. Now, however, they must bethink them of escape, if such thing be their fortune, and Tinúviel wrapped part of her dark mantle about Baron, and for so a while, flitting by dusk and dark, amid the hills they were seen by none, albeit Melko had raised all of his orcs in terror against them, and his fury at the seizing of his jewel was greater than the elves had ever seen it yet. Ever so, it seems to them that the net of the hunters drew ever more upon them, and that they had leaves the edge of the more familiar woods, and past the glooms of the forest of Talfruin, and there were many leagues of peril to pass between them and the caverns of the king, and even then did they reach ever there, they would seem to draw upon the chase, and them thither, and Melko's hate upon old and woodland folk. And so great indeed was the hue in the cry, that Hugh had learned of it far away, and he marvelled much at the daring of those twain, and still more ever that they had escaped from Agamandi. Now he goes with many dogs through the woods hunting orcs and thanes of Tevildo, and many hurts he got thus, and many of them he slew or put to fear and flight, until one even at dusk the Valar brought to him a glade in that northwest region of Artenor that was called afterwards Dan Dorthgothan, the land of the Dark Idols. But that is a matter that not concerns this tale. How be it that even a dark land and a gloomy and foreboding and dread wandered beneath its lowering trees, even in Tarfurin, and those two elves, Tinúviel and Beren, were lying therein, wherein without hope, and Tinúviel whipped, but Beren was fingering his knife. And now when Huan saw them, he would not suffer them to speak or tell any of their tale, but swayed away, took Tinúviel upon his mighty back, and bade Beren run as best he could beside them, for a great company of the orcs are drawing swiftly hither, and wolves are their trackers and their scouts. Now goeth their human pack, run about them. They go very swiftly among secret paths, towards the homes of the folk of Tinúviel, far away. Thus it was that they eluded their hosts of enemies, but none the less an encounter afterwards with wanderings of evil. Beren slew an orc that came nigh to dragging off Tinúviel, and that was a good deed, seeing then the hunt of them still pressed close, and once more Huan did lead them by winding ways, daring not straightly to bring them to the land of the woodland fairies. So cunning, however, was their leading, that after many days the chase fell away, and no longer did they see or hear anything of the bands of orcs. No goblins waylaid them, nor did any howling of any evil wolves come upon the airs at night, and belike that was they had stepped within the circle of Gwendolen's magic, which hid the paths from evil things, and kept harm from the regions of the wood elves. Then Tinúviel did breathe freely once more, as she had not done since she fled from her father's halls, and Beren rested in the sun far from the glooms of Angband, until the last bitterness of thraldom left him, because of the light falling through green leaves, and the whisper of clean winds, the song of birds. Once more they were wholly unafraid. At last there came upon there nevertheless a day whereon, waking out of a deep slumber, Beren started up, as one who leaves a dream of happy things coming suddenly into his mind, and he said, "Farewell, O Huan, most trusty comrade, and thou, little Tinúviel, whom I love, fare thee well. This I only beg of thee, get thee now straight to the safety of thy home, and may good Huan lead me. Ay, but though I must away into the solitude of the woods, for I have lost the Silmaril which I had, and never dare I draw again to Agamandi more, wherefore neither I will enter the halls of Tinúviel." Then he wept to himself, but Tinúviel was nigh, and near had hearkened his musing, came beside him and said, "Nay, now is my heart changed, and if thou dwellest in the woods, O Beren, and the wind, then so will I, and if thou wilt wander in the wild places there, I will wander also, with thee and after thee. Never thou shall my father see me again, save only if you takest me to him. Then indeed was Beren glad at her sweet words, and fain he would have dwelt with her as a huntsman of the wild. Was his heart smote him for all that she had suffered for him, and for her he put away his pride. And indeed she reasoned with him, saying he would be fully too stubborn, that her father would greet him with naught but joy, being glad to see his daughter yet alive. And maybe, she said, he will have shame that his jesting has given thy fair hand to the jaw of Carcarus. But Hugh and she also implored to return with them a space. For my father owes thee a great reward, O Huan, saith she, and he loves her daughter at all. So it came that those three set forward once again together, and it came at last back to the woodlands that Tinúviel know, and in the light of the dwelling of her folk and the deep holes of her home. Yet even as they approach, they find fear and tumult among the people, such as not been long ago. And seeing as they wept before their doors, they learned that ever since the day of Tinúviel's secret flight, ill fortune had befallen them. Lo, the king had been distraught with grief, and relaxed his ancient wariness and cunning. Indeed, his warriors had been sent hither and thither into the unwholesome woods, searching for that maiden, and many had been slain or lost forever, and war there was with Melko's servants all about their northern and eastern borders, so that the folk feared mightily must that Ainu upraise his strength and come utterly to crush them, and Gwendolen's magic may not have the strength to withhold numbers of orcs. Behold, said they, now is the worst of all befallen, for the Queen Gwendolen sat aloof and smiled not nor not spoken. Now, looking as if it were a great distance, the web of her magic has blown thin about the woods, and the woods are dreary, for Dairon has not come back, neither is his music heard, never in the glades. Behold now the crown of all of our evening tidings, for now there has been broken upon us, raging from the halls of evil, a great grey wolf filled with an evil spirit. He fares as though lashed by some hidden madness, and none is safe. Already as he has slain, as he runs wildly snapping and yelling through the woods, so the very banks of the stream that flows before the king's halls has become a lurking place of danger. There comes the evil wolf, sometimes often to drink, looking as if the evil prince himself with bloodshot eyes and tongue lolling out, and never can he slake his desire for water, though some inward fire devours him. Then was Tinúviel sad at the thought of the unpleasantness that had come upon her folk, and most of all was her heart bitter for the sword of Darien. For of this she had heard not any murmur before, yet she could not wish Beren had never come to the lands of Artenor, and together they made haste to Tinúviel, and already to the elves of the woods seemed that the evil was at an end now, that Tinúviel was come back from them among them unharmed. Indeed, scarce they had hoped for that. In great gloom did they find King Tinúviel, yet suddenly in his sorrow melted to tears of gladness, and Gwendolen sings again for joy when Tinúviel enters there, and casting away her raiment of dark mist, she stands before them in her pearly radiance of old. For a while all is mirth and wonder in that hall, and yet at length the king turns his eyes to Beren and says, So thou hast returned too, bringing a Silmaril, beyond doubt in recompense for all the ill thou hast wrought upon my land, or thou hast not, I know not wherefore thou art there here. Then Tinúviel stamped her foot, and cried so that king and all about him wondered at her new and fearless mood. For shame, my father, behold, here is Beren the brave, whom thy jesting drove into dark places in foul captivity, and the Valar alone saved from a bitter death. Methinks 'twould rather befit a king of the Eldor to reward him rather than to revile him. Nay, said Beren, the king thy father has the right. Lord, I have a Silmaril in my hand even now. Show me then, said the king in amaze. That I cannot, said Beren, for my hand is not here. And he held forth his maimed arm. Then the king's heart turned from him by reason of his stout and courteous demeanour, and he bade Beren and Tinúviel relate to him all that had befallen either of them. And he was eager to hearken, for he did not fully comprehend the meaning of Beren's words. For when he had heard all, yet more his heart turned to Beren, and he marvelled at the love that had awakened in the heart of Tinúviel. There she had been done greater deeds, and more daring than all the warriors of his folk. Never again, said he, O Beren, I beg of thee, leave this court, nor the side of Tinúviel, for thou art a great elf, and thy name will be never great among the kindreds. Yet Beren answered him proudly, and said, Nay, O king, I hold to my word and thine. I will get thee that Silmaril, or ever I will dwell in peace in thy halls. And the king entreated him to journey no more in the dark and unknown realms. But Beren said, No need there is thereof, for behold, that jewel is even nigh to their caverns. And he made clear to Tinúviel that the beast that ravaged their land was none other than Carcharas, the wolf ward of Melko's gates. And this was not known to all, but Beren knew it by Húin, whose cunning in the reading of track and slaught was greatest among all the hounds, and there in none of them all are none unskilled. Húin was indeed with Beren in the halls, and where twain spoke of a chase and great hunt, he begged to be in that deed, and it was granted gladly. Now did these three prepare themselves to harry that beast, for all the folk be rid of the terror of the wolf. And Beren kept his word, bringing a Silmaril to shine once more in Elfness. King Tinúviel himself led that chase, and Beren was beside him, and Madblung the heavy-handed, chief of the heavens, chief of the king's thanes, leaped up and grasped a spear, a mighty weapon captured in battle with the distant orcs. And those three stalked Húin, the mightiest of the dogs, but they would not take according to the desire of the king, who said, 4 is enough for the slaying even of the hell-wolf. But even those only who said that they knew something fearsome was that beast, nigh as large as a horse among men, and so great was the ardour of its breath that it scorched whoever it touched. And about the hour of sunrise they set forth, and soon after Húin espied a new slaught amongst the stream, not far from the king's doors, and quoth he, This is the print of Carcharas. Thereafter they followed the stream all day, and at many places its banks were new trampled and torn with the water of the pools that lay about as it fouled. So many beasts possessed of madness had rolled and fought there not before. Now sinks the sun, and fades beyond the western trees. Darkness is creeping from hillstone, so the light of the forest dies. Even so come they to a place where the spore swerves from the stream, or perchance lost its waters, and Húin never may follow it. Therefore they camp, sleeping in turns beside the stream, as the early night wears away. Suddenly, in Beren's watch, a sound of great terror leaped up from far away, a howling as if 70 maddened wolves. Then lo! the brushwood cracks and saplings snap as terror draws nearer, and Beren knows that Carcharas is upon them. Scarce he had to rise the others. They were there, just sprung up and half awake, when a great form loomed in the wavering moonlight, filtering there. It was fleeing one like mad, its course bent towards the water. Thereat Húin gave tongue. Straightway the beast swerved aside towards them, and foam was drinking from its claws, and a red light shining from its eyes, and its face was marred by mingled terror with wrath. No sooner did he leave the trees than Húin rushed upon him, fearless of heart. But he, with a mighty leap, sprang right over that great dog, for his fury was kindled suddenly against Beren, whom he recognized as he stood behind. To his dark mind it seemed that there was one of the cause of his agony. Then Beren swiftly thrust upward with a spear at his throat, and Húin leapt up again, and had him in a hind leg, and Carcharas fell as a stone, for at that same moment the king's spear found his heart, and his evil spirit gushed forth and sped howling faintly, as it fared over the dark hills to Mandos. But Beren lay him under, crushed beneath his weight, but they rolled back their carcass, and full to cutting it open. But Húin licked Beren's face, from where blood is flowing. Soon is the truth of Baron's words made clear, for the vitals of the world are half consumed, as though an inner fire had long been smouldering there. And suddenly the night is filled with a wondrous lustre, shot with pale and secret colours, as Mablung draws forth from the Silmaril. Then holding it out, he said, "Behold, O King!" But Tinúviel said, "Nay, never would I handle it, save if Baron gave it to me." But Huan said, "And it seems to never be, unless ye tend him swiftly, for methinks he is hurt sorely." And Mablung and the King were sorely ashamed. And therefore they raised Baron gently up, and tended him and washed him. And he breathed, but he spoke nor opened his eyes. And when the sun arose, they had rested a little, they bore him softly, as they might bore upon a bier of boughs, back through the woodlands. And nigh midday they drew near the homes of the folk again, and they were deadly weary, and Baron had not moved nor spoken, but groaned thrice. There did all the people flock to meet them when their approach was noised among them, and some bore them meat and cool drinks and souls, and healing things for their hurts. But the harm that Baron had met, great indeed had been their joy. Now they had covered the lofty boughs, whereupon he lay with soft raiment, and they bore him away to the halls of the King. And there was Tinúviel awaiting him in great distress. She fell upon Baron's breast and wept and kissed him, and he awoke and knew her. And after Mablung had gave him that Silmaril, he lifted it above him, gazing at his beauty, ere he wondered slowly and with pain. "Behold, O King, I give you the wondrous jewel thou didst desire, but it is a little thing found by the wayside. For once methinks thou hast one, been thought more beautiful, and she is now mine." As he spake, the shadows of Mandos lay upon his face, and his spirit fled in that hour to the margin of the world, and Tinúviel's tender kisses called him not back. And did Vian suddenly cease speaking, and Ariel sorely said, "A tad of ruth, for so sweet a maid to tell." But behold, Vian wept, and not for a while did she say, "Nay, that is not all the tale, but here it endeth all that I rightly know." And other children there spake, and then one said, "Lo, I had heard the magic Tinúviel's tender kisses healed Baron, and recalled his spirit from the gates of Mandos. Long time he dwelt with the lost elves, wandering glades with love and sweet Tinúviel." But another said, "Nay, that was not so. O Elser, and if indeed thou wilt listen, I will tell you the true and wondrous tale. For Baron died there in Tinúviel's arms, as Vayan had said, and Tinúviel, crushed with sorrow and finding no comfort or light in all the world, followed him swiftly down those dark ways, all must tread alone. Now her beauty and tender loveliness touched even the tender heart of Mandos. Suffered he to lead Baron forth once more into the world, nor had this ever been done since man or elf. And many songs and stories there are of prayer of Tinúviel before the throne of Mandos, that I remember not right well. Yet said Mandos to those twain, "O low elves, it is not a perfect life of joy that I dismiss you, for such men be in the world of Melko, of the evil heart, and you know thee will have even mortal as men, and when ye fare hither again, it will be forever, unless the gods summon you indeed to Valinor." Nonetheless those twain departed hand in hand, and they were fared together through the northern woods, and oftentimes they were seen dancing magic dances down the hill, and their name became heard far and wide. And thereat the boys ceased, and Vayan said, "Aye, and they did more than dance, for their deeds afterwards were very great, and many tales thereof thou must hear, O Ariel Melanon, among another time of tale-telling, for those twain it is those stories' name, O Culwathon, to say the dead live again, and they become mighty fairies in the land of the north of Syrian. Behold, now all is ended, and doth like it thee?" Though Ariel said, Indeed, it is a wondrous tale, such as I had not looked to hear from the lips of little maids Maravan went to Leva. But Veon answered him, Nay, but I fashioned it not with the words of myself, but it is dear to me, and indeed all the children know of the deeds it relates. I have learned it by heart, reading in the great books, nor do I comprehend all that is set in it. Neither do I, said Ariel, but suddenly cried out, Behold, Ariel, Phaon has never told you what befell Huan. Now he would take no rewards from Tinúviel, nor dwell nigh him, but wandered aforth, grieving for Tinúviel and Baron. On a time he fell in with Mablung, who aided in the chase, and was now fallen much to hunting in lonely parts, and the twain hunted together as friends, till the days of Glorin the Drake, and of Turin Turambar, who once Huan found Baron and played his parts, and the great deeds of the now Glofering, the necklace of the dwarves. Ay, nay, how could I tell you all this, said Vian, for beyond, it is time for the evening meat already, and soon the great gong rang.